to a life of luxury. Cheers. I could never marry a poor man. Girl, same. The struggle is not for me.
In the rich and peaceful city of Abuja, there lived a billionaire named Chinedu Okafor. Chinedu was not born poor. His father was a businessman, but Chinedu worked very hard to grow the family business into something bigger. By the age of 35, he was already one of the most respected shipping businessmen in Nigeria. His company, Okafor Global Shipping, owned many large containers and cargo ships that moved goods from one country to another. People admired him. Some feared him. Many wanted to be close to him, but only a few truly knew him. Chinedu was calm, wise, and observant. He did not talk too much, but he listened carefully. He believed that money was important, but character was more important. When he met Chidimma, he felt something he had never felt before. Chidimma was beautiful, confident, and lively. She had bright eyes and a charming smile. She loved fashion and always dressed well. When she entered a room, people noticed her immediately. They met at a charity event organized by one of Chinedu's business partners. That night, she wore a shining gold dress that matched her glowing skin. When she spoke to him, she was respectful. "I have heard a lot about you, Mr. Okafor," she said with a soft smile. "I hope they are good things," Chinedu replied. She laughed sweetly. That was how it started. After months of dating, Chinedu proposed. Their wedding became one of the most talked about events in Abuja. Important men and women attended, expensive cars filled the parking lot, the decorations were grand, the food was rich and plenty. People said they are a perfect match. After the wedding, Chinedu took his bride to his mansion. The house was large and beautiful. It had tall glass windows, golden curtains, a swimming pool, and a garden filled with flowers. Inside, the floors shined like mirrors. The kitchen was filled with modern equipment. The master bedroom was bigger than some people's apartments. Chidimma was amazed. "This is my home?" she asked excitedly. "Our home," Chinedu corrected her gently. At first, everything was sweet. They traveled to different countries for their honeymoon. They took pictures in beautiful places. They posted smiling photos online. Many people envied their life. When they returned home, Chinedu gave his wife access to his bank card. "Buy whatever you need," he told her. "You are my queen." Chidimma smiled happily. And she began to spend. At first, it was normal. She bought new clothes, she bought perfumes, she bought gold jewelry. Chinedu did not complain. But weeks turned into months. The spending did not reduce. It increased. Every week, delivery vans stopped at the mansion gate. Big boxes arrived almost every day. Gold necklaces, bracelets, earrings, designer handbags, expensive shoes. Sometimes she bought things she already had. One afternoon, Chinedu returned from work earlier than usual. He entered the bedroom quietly and found Chidimma sitting on the bed, surrounded by gold jewelry. She was trying on 3 different necklaces at the same time, looking at herself in the mirror. "My love, don't you think you have enough gold for now?" he said gently. She laughed lightly. "You can never have enough gold," she replied. "Besides, you are a billionaire." Chinedu forced a small smile. Later that evening, Chidimma hosted her friends. They sat in the living room, drinking expensive wine and laughing loudly. Chinedu passed by and heard one of her friends say, "Chidimma, you are lucky. You married the right man. No more suffering in this life." Chidimma replied proudly, "Of course, I told myself I will never marry a poor man." Those words entered Chinedu's heart like a sharp knife. He did not say anything. That night, he sat alone in his private office inside the mansion. He looked around at the expensive furniture, the shining awards on the wall, and the large painting behind his desk. Then he whispered to himself, "Does my wife love me, or does she love this life?" He remembered how she reacted whenever he bought her something expensive, the excitement in her eyes. But when he tried to have deep conversations about life, values, or future plans, she quickly changed the topic. One day, he tried to discuss charity work. "We should help the less privileged," he suggested. She shrugged. "That is your business. I don't want stress." Another day, he told her he might invest in a risky business that could reduce our money for a while. She immediately became serious. "Reduce our money? Why would you do that?" she asked sharply. He noticed that any time money was involved, her attention became serious. But when it came to building emotional connection, she seemed distracted. Chinedu began to observe more carefully. He noticed that she posted more pictures of their cars and house than pictures of them together. He noticed that she enjoyed telling people about how expensive her jewelry was. He noticed that she rarely asked how his day went at work. These small things began to grow into a large question inside his heart. One evening, while Chidimma was sleeping, Chinedu stood by the window and looked outside at the bright city lights of Abuja. Cars moved quietly on the road. The world looked peaceful, but inside him there was a storm. "What if everything disappears?" he asked himself. "Will she still stay?" The thought refused to leave. He loved his wife deeply, but he feared something. He feared that her love might be tied to his wealth. He did not want a wife who loved his money. He wanted a wife who would stand beside him in good times and bad times. He did not know it yet, but that night was the beginning of a dangerous decision. A decision that would test not only his wife, but also his own heart. Life in the mansion continued. From the outside, everything looked perfect. In the rich city of Abuja, people admired Chinedu and Chidimma. They were seen as a powerful couple. Social media was filled with their smiling pictures, expensive dinners, vacation memories, gold jewelry shining under bright lights. But inside the mansion, something was slowly changing. Chinedu began to observe more carefully. Every morning, delivery trucks still came to the gate. New packages arrived, designer handbags, imported perfumes, gold bracelets wrapped in soft velvet boxes. Chidimma always looked excited when new items arrived. She would clap her hands like a child receiving sweets. "Another one?" Chinedu asked gently one afternoon as he watched her open a large box. She smiled brightly. "This one is limited edition. Only 5 people in Nigeria have it." Chinedu nodded slowly. Later that week, he walked into the living room and heard Chidimma speaking on the phone with her friend. "My husband is very rich," she said proudly. "I don't even check prices anymore." Her friend laughed loudly through the phone. Chinedu stood quietly behind the wall, listening. "And I can never marry a poor man," Chidimma continued. "God forbid." Those words hit him deeply. He walked away before she saw him. That night, he lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling. She was scrolling through her phone, smiling at pictures of jewelry and fashion pages. "Chidimma," he said softly. "Yes," she replied without looking up. "If one day things change, will you still stand with me?" She frowned slightly. "What kind of change?" "What if business becomes hard? What if we have to reduce spending for a while?" She finally looked at him. "Why are you talking like that? You are a billionaire. That kind of thing cannot happen." Chinedu forced a small smile. But inside him, doubt was growing. A few days later, he suggested something serious. "I'm thinking of starting a charity foundation," he said during dinner. "There are many poor families who need help." Chidimma shrugged. "That is fine, but don't use too much money for it," she replied. "You know charity does not bring profit." He was quiet. Another evening, he decided to test her reaction. "I may invest in a new shipping project," he told her. "It is risky. For some time, our income may reduce." Her face changed immediately. "Reduce?" she repeated sharply. "Why take risk when we are already comfortable?" "Business always involves risk," he explained calmly. "I don't like it," she said firmly. "I don't want to go back to suffering." That sentence stayed in his heart. Go back to suffering. Did she see him as protection from suffering only, or as a partner for life? One afternoon, while Chidimma was sleeping, Chinedu walked into this private office. He closed the door and sat down slowly. He began to remember small moments. How she proudly told people of his wealth. How she always compared herself with other rich wives. How she once said, "Money is security. Without money, love is not enough." At the time, he had laughed. Now, those words felt heavy. Later that evening, Chidimma hosted her friends again. They sat in the living room drinking expensive wine and laughing loudly. Chinedu passed by quietly. One of her friends said, "If your husband ever becomes poor, what will you do?" They all laughed as if it was a joke. Chidimma replied confidently, "My husband can never be poor, and even if that happens, I will not sit and suffer." The room exploded with laughter. Chinedu continued walking, but his heart felt cold. That night, he stood by the window in their bedroom, looking at the bright city lights of Abuja. Cars moved like tiny ants below. The city was alive, but inside there was silence. "Does she love me?" he whispered softly, "or does she love what I provide?" He loved his wife deeply. He did not want to believe she was with him only for money. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and once doubt enters a heart, it grows quietly. He knew one thing. He needed the truth, even if the truth would hurt him. And that was the night Chinedu began to think of a test, a dangerous test that would change everything. The seed of doubt had already grown in Chinedu's heart. For many nights he could not sleep well. He kept thinking about Chidimma's words. "I can never marry a poor man." The sentence echoed in his mind again and again. One morning, while sitting alone in his private office inside the mansion in Abuja, Chinedu made a decision. "If I want peace," he said to himself, "I must know the truth." He picked up his phone and called his trusted manager, Emeka. "Come to my office immediately," he said calmly. When Emeka arrived, Chinedu explained his plan. "I want to test my wife," he said. Emeka looked surprised. "Test her? How?" "I will make her believe I have lost everything." Emeka was silent for a moment. "Sir, that is dangerous," he warned. "What if the result hurts you?" Chinedu looked out the window. It is better to face painful truth than live with sweet lies. That was the day the plan began. That evening, Chinedu returned home earlier than usual. He did not smile. He did not greet the house staff warmly like he normally did. His face looked serious. Chidimma was in the living room admiring a new gold bracelet. "My love," she said happily, "look at this beautiful piece." Chinedu did not respond with excitement. Instead, he sat down slowly. "Chidimma," he said in a heavy voice, "something terrible has happened." Her smile disappeared. "What is it?" "One of my biggest shipping containers has sunk into the sea." She stared at him. "What do you mean, sunk?" "The goods inside were worth millions. The company will suffer a great loss." Her hands began to shake. "That is not funny, Chinedu." "I am not joking," he replied quietly. The room suddenly felt cold. Chidimma stood up. "What does this mean?" she asked nervously. Chinedu took a deep breath. "I borrowed money from the bank some months ago to expand the business." Her eyes widened. "And I used this house as collateral." The bracelet slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. "You used this house?" she shouted, "without telling me?" "I believed the investment would succeed," he said calmly, "but now everything is at risk." Chidimma began to cry loudly. "No, no, no, this cannot be happening." She started pacing around the living room. "What will people say? What about my friends? What about our life?" Chinedu watched her carefully. He was not looking for fear of losing comfort. He was looking for something else: support, encouragement, faith. But her tears were not about him. They were about the mansion, about the cars, about the lifestyle. "Can't you fix it?" she demanded. "I am trying," he replied, "but it may take time." "How long?" "I don't know." She covered her face with her hands. "I cannot suffer again," she whispered. That sentence cut him deeply. "Again?" he asked softly. She did not answer. Instead, she sat down and cried. Chinedu moved closer to her. "Chidimma," he said gently, "even if we lose everything, we still have each other." She looked at him with fear. "But I did not marry a poor man," she said without thinking. Silence filled the room. Chinedu felt something inside him break. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he replied quietly, but inside him he knew the test had only just begun. Over the next few weeks, Chinedu acted worried every day. He pretended to make serious phone calls. He acted stressed. He stopped giving her money freely. He reduced household spending. Chidimma's mood changed completely. She stopped smiling. She stopped posting pictures online. She avoided her friends. One afternoon, she asked him directly, "Are we going to lose this house?" He looked at her for a long moment. "It is possible." Her face turned pale. That night, she did not sleep well. She kept asking questions. "How did this happen? Why didn't you insure the goods? Why didn't you tell me before?" Chinedu answered calmly each time, but inside he was watching, learning, understanding. The truth was slowly revealing itself, and soon the final stage of the test would begin. Chinedu did not know yet whether he was about to lose his mansion or his marriage. But one thing was certain: after this test, nothing would ever be the same again. 2 months passed. The air inside the mansion in Abuja no longer felt warm. There was no laughter, no loud music, no delivery vans at the gate. Everything had changed. Chinedu continued acting worried. He made serious phone calls every day. Sometimes he even left the house looking frustrated, only to return late at night with a tired face. Chidimma watched him carefully. Her fear was growing. One hot afternoon, while Chidimma was sitting quietly in the living room, she heard loud voices outside. She stood up quickly. Through the window, she saw 2 men in dark suits speaking with the security guards. Her heart began to beat fast. Moments later, Chinedu entered the house. "They are from the bank," he said quietly. Her body went cold. "The bank?" she whispered. "Yes," he replied. "They have come for the house." Before she could speak again, there was a firm knock on the door. Chinedu walked slowly to open it. 2 men entered with serious faces. They introduced themselves as bank agents. They spoke politely but firmly. "Sir, you were given enough time," one of them said. "The bank has decided to take possession of the property." Chidimma began to shake. "You can't do this," she shouted. "This is our home." But the men remained calm. "Madam, we are only doing our job." Within hours, everything changed. The big mansion that once hosted parties and laughter became silent and empty. Workers began carrying furniture outside. Security guards stepped aside. Neighbors watched from a distance. Chidimma cried loudly as she packed her designer clothes into suitcases. "Where are we going?" she kept asking. Chinedu answered softly, "I have rented a small place for now." "A small place?" she repeated in disbelief. "Yes, just 2 rooms." She stared at him as if she did not recognize him anymore. "2 rooms?" she said slowly. "After this life?" Chinedu did not respond. He simply carried one suitcase and walked toward the car. The car stopped in front of a simple two-room apartment in a quiet area of the city. The building was old but clean. Children were playing outside. There were no tall gates, no marble floors, no chandelier. Chidimma refused to step out of the car at first. "This cannot be my life," she said bitterly, but she had no choice. Inside, the apartment was small. A simple sofa, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms. No luxury, no beauty, only reality. That first night, Chidimma sat on the small bed and cried. "I cannot live like this," she said. Chinedu sat beside her. "It is only for a while," he said gently. "We will rebuild." She pulled away from him. "You rebuild," she replied coldly. "You caused this." Those words pierced his heart, but he remained silent. Days passed. Chidimma's attitude changed completely. She no longer called him my love. She stopped cooking for him. She stopped smiling. Instead, she complained every day. "You have ruined my life. My friends are laughing at me. I cannot suffer because of your mistakes." Chinedu listened quietly. One evening, when he returned from outside, she looked at him with anger. "Broke man," she said under her breath. He heard it clearly, but he pretended not to. Inside him, the truth was becoming clearer. This was no longer just a test, it was a revelation. The woman he loved was slowly walking away, not because of hardship, but because of the loss of luxury. And soon the final decision would be made, because respect once lost is difficult to restore, and love without loyalty cannot survive. Life in the small apartment in Abuja became harder each day. The first week was filled with silence. The second week was filled with complaints. By the third week, respect had completely disappeared. Chidimma no longer tried to hide her frustration. One morning, Chinedu was preparing to leave the house. He wore a simple shirt and carried an old briefcase. As he reached the door, Chidimma spoke from behind him. "Where are you going?" she asked coldly. "To look for solutions," he replied calmly. She laughed bitterly. "Solutions? You should have thought about that before losing everything." He paused for a moment, but did not answer. Then she said the words that cut deeply. "I cannot suffer because of a broke man." The room became very quiet. Chinedu closed his eyes briefly, but he said nothing. He simply walked out. One afternoon, a neighbor greeted Chinedu outside the building. "Good afternoon, sir," the man said politely. Before Chinedu could respond, Chidimma stepped outside. She looked at the neighbor and said loudly, "He used to be a big man. Now look at us." The neighbor felt uncomfortable and quickly walked away. Chinedu felt shame burn inside him, not because he was poor, but because his wife had no loyalty. That evening, he sat alone outside the building, watching the children play football. He remembered how she once called him "my king." Now she could not even call him "my husband" with respect. One night, the tension exploded. "I am tired," Chidimma shouted. "I did not marry you to suffer." Chinedu looked at her quietly. "And what if this suffering is temporary?" he asked. She shook her head. "I cannot gamble my life on hope." "So what are you saying?" he asked softly. She looked at him directly. "I want to leave." The words fell like heavy stones. Chinedu felt pain in his chest, but his face remained calm. "If that is your decision," he said slowly, "I will not stop you." She was surprised by his calmness. "You are not even fighting for me?" she asked. He looked at her deeply. "I cannot fight for someone who does not want to stay." Tears filled her eyes, but not from love, from frustration. The next morning, she packed her clothes. There were no designer boxes this time, only simple bags. She did not look back when she left. Chinedu stood at the window of the small apartment and watched her enter a taxi. As the taxi drove away, he whispered to himself, "The test is over." But his heart felt heavier than he expected, because sometimes knowing the truth hurts more than living in doubt. And soon, Chidimma would discover that she had made the greatest mistake of her life. But by then, it might already be too late. The morning after Chidimma left, the small apartment felt very quiet. Chinedu woke up early. He looked at the empty side of the bed. He did not cry. He did not shout. He only closed his eyes for a moment. Then he stood up. He wore his simple shirt and looked around the small room one last time. The small sofa, the tiny kitchen, the quiet walls that had heard many painful words. He took his phone and made a call. "Emeka," he said calmly, "it is time." On the other side, Emeka replied with respect, "Yes, sir, everything is ready." Chinedu ended the call and stepped outside. The morning sun was rising over Abuja. The air felt fresh. For the first time in many months, his face looked peaceful. An hour later, a black luxury car stopped in front of the small apartment building. The same neighbors who once saw him as a struggling man now watched in surprise. The driver stepped out quickly and opened the back door. Chinedu no longer wore the simple shirt. He had changed into a perfectly tailored dark suit. His shoes shined. His wristwatch sparkled under the sun. He walked into the car without looking back. The car drove away smoothly. When they arrived at the tall glass building in the center of Abuja, security guards stood straight immediately. "Good morning, sir," they greeted respectfully. Chinedu nodded. Workers inside the building whispered, "Chairman is back. It has been months." He looked stronger. He entered his large office on the top floor. The office was wide and beautiful. Big windows showed the whole city of Abuja. The desk was polished wood. The leather chair was large and comfortable. Everything was still his. Nothing had changed, because nothing was ever lost. Emeka walked in with a tablet in his hand. "Welcome back, sir," he said with a small smile. Chinedu sat down slowly in his executive chair. "Report," he said calmly. Emeka began to explain. "All businesses are running well. The shipping company is stable. The containers are safe. The bank agents we hired completed their part perfectly. No one suspects anything." Chinedu nodded. "And her?" he asked quietly. Emeka understood immediately. "She moved into a new apartment yesterday. A man named Kelvin is taking care of her." Chinedu's face did not change. Kelvin was not just any man. Kelvin worked for Chinedu. He was part of the plan. Chinedu stood up and walked toward the large window. He looked at the busy roads below. Cars moved fast. People walked with purpose. "Love should not depend on money," he said softly. Emeka remained silent. "For months," Chinedu continued, "I lived like a poor man. I wanted to see if she would stay, if she would respect me, if she would believe in us." He paused. But she chose comfort over commitment. The room felt heavy. Emeka finally spoke. "Sir, what do you want to do now?" Chinedu turned around slowly. His eyes were calm, but there was a deep pain inside them. "It is time to finish this test." That afternoon, Chinedu signed several documents, business deals, contracts, investments. He was fully back in control. Employees walked carefully around him. Everyone could feel his authority. Yet inside his heart, there was no celebration, only disappointment. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Chinedu sat alone in his big office. He remembered the day he met Chidimma, her smile, her laughter, the way she once held his hand. He closed his eyes. "Maybe I should not have tested her," he whispered. For the first time, doubt entered his heart. Yes, she failed the test, but he had created the test. He had chosen silence instead of honesty. He had chosen deception instead of communication. He opened his eyes slowly. The city lights of Abuja began to shine again. Power had returned to him. Wealth was never lost. But something important was broken. And deep inside, Chinedu began to feel the first small seed of regret. After leaving Chinedu, Chidimma refused to look back. She moved into a small but neat apartment in another part of Abuja. It was not as big as the mansion, but it was better than the two-room apartment she had left behind. She told herself she had made the right decision. "I cannot suffer," she repeated many times. "I deserve a better life." A few days later, Kelvin visited her. Kelvin was a tall and well-dressed young man. He was handsome and confident. He drove a clean white car and wore expensive perfumes. He spoke softly and smiled often. Chidimma felt lucky. "You deserve comfort," Kelvin told her one evening as they sat in her living room. "A beautiful woman like you should not struggle." Those words touched her heart. Slowly, Kelvin began to take her to expensive restaurants. He bought her gifts. He paid her rent without complaining. Chidimma felt alive again. She started dressing beautifully once more. Gold earrings returned to her ears. Designer handbags appeared in her hands again. Her social media pages became active with smiling pictures and luxury places. Her friends praised her. "You see," one of them said, "you made the right choice. Life is too short to suffer with a broke man." Chidimma laughed proudly. Deep inside, she pushed away every memory of Chinedu. Meanwhile, in his tall office building, Chinedu received updates. Emeka stood before him one afternoon. "Kelvin is doing well," Emeka reported. "She believes everything." Chinedu did not smile. Kelvin was not just a random rich man. He worked for Chinedu. The car, the gifts, the money, everything came from Chinedu's company. It was the final stage of the test. Chinedu walked to the window again. "Does she look happy?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir," Emeka replied, "very happy." Chinedu closed his eyes for a moment. There was no joy in his heart, only confirmation. Weeks passed. Kelvin treated Chidimma like a queen. He spoke about business. He spoke about investments. He even mentioned that his boss wanted to meet her soon. "My boss likes to know important people in my life," Kelvin said one evening. Chidimma smiled brightly. She imagined meeting another wealthy businessman. Maybe this time her future would be even bigger than before. She began planning what to wear. She wanted to look perfect. That night, as she stood before her mirror, adjusting her gold necklace, she whispered to herself, "I will never be poor again." But somewhere far away, inside a tall glass building, a man looked at the city lights and prepared for the final revelation. The stage was almost set, and soon the truth would stand before her. But she did not know that her biggest shock was coming not from poverty, but from the man she once called her husband. The day Kelvin spoke about finally introducing her to his boss, Chidimma could not hide her excitement. She woke up very early that morning. She chose her most beautiful dress. It was elegant and expensive. She wore shining gold jewelry and applied soft makeup. She wanted to look perfect. "This is my new beginning," she told herself in the mirror. Kelvin arrived in his white car exactly at noon. "You look stunning," he said with a charming smile. Chidimma felt proud. As the car drove through the busy streets of Abuja, she looked outside and imagined a brighter future. Bigger houses, more money, more respect. They finally stopped in front of a tall glass building in the center of the city. Chidimma's eyes widened. The building looked powerful and expensive. "Your boss works here?" she asked softly. Kelvin smiled. "Yes, he owns this company." Her heart beat faster. They entered the building together. Security guards greeted Kelvin respectfully. Workers moved around quickly, carrying files and speaking politely. Everything looked serious and important. They stepped into a private elevator that moved smoothly to the top floor. Chidimma adjusted her necklace again. She wanted to impress this powerful man. When the elevator doors opened, a large and beautiful office appeared before them. The room was wide and elegant. Big glass windows showed the whole city of Abuja. A polished wooden desk stood in the center. A large black leather chair faced away from them, toward the window. The chair slowly turned around. Chidimma froze. Her breath stopped. Sitting calmly in the chair was Chinedu, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, looking powerful, looking confident, looking exactly like the billionaire she once knew. For a moment, nobody spoke. Chidimma suddenly laughed nervously. "Chinedu," she said mockingly, "are you looking for a job in my boyfriend's company?" Kelvin's face immediately changed. "Watch your words," Kelvin said sharply. Chidimma turned to him in confusion. "What do you mean?" Kelvin stepped aside respectfully and lowered his head slightly. "Good afternoon, sir," he said to Chinedu. The room became silent. Chidimma's smile slowly disappeared. Her hands began to shake. Chinedu stood up slowly from his chair. His face was calm, but his eyes were serious. "I am the boss," he said quietly. The words hit her like thunder. She stepped backward. No, this is not possible," she whispered. Chinedu walked closer, his steps slow and controlled. There was no lost container. There was no bank problem, no real debt. It was all a test. Tears began to gather in her eyes. "Kelvin works for me," Chinedu added. "Everything you enjoyed came from my company." The truth stood naked in front of her. She could not speak. Her pride disappeared. Her confidence melted. She fell to her knees. "I am sorry. I did not know. Please forgive me. I made a mistake." Chinedu looked at her quietly. His heart felt heavy. "You did not leave because I was a bad man. You left because you thought I was poor." She cried harder. "Please give me another chance." For a long moment, Chinedu said nothing. Then he pressed a button on his desk. 2 security guards entered immediately. "Escort her out," he said calmly. Chidimma screamed and begged, "Chinedu, please, I love you." But it was too late. The guards gently lifted her and led her toward the door. She looked back one last time. Chinedu stood still, his face expressionless. The elevator doors closed, and with that sound, her second chance closed too. But as the office became quiet again, Chinedu slowly sat down. There was no joy in his heart, only silence, only regret, because in testing her heart, he had also broken his own. Chinedu sat alone in his chair. The city lights of Abuja were shining outside the glass windows, but inside his heart, there was no light. He had proven his point. He had won the test. But why did victory feel so empty? He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He remembered the first day he met Chidimma, her laughter, her excitement, the way she held his arm proudly at their wedding. Were those moments fake? Or had money slowly changed her heart? He sighed deeply. "Maybe I should have spoken the truth," he whispered to himself. Testing her had seemed wise at the time, but now he wondered if love should ever be tested like a business deal. Meanwhile, outside the building, Chidimma stood on the pavement. Her makeup was ruined by tears. The security guards had left her alone. The busy city moved around her, but she felt frozen. People walked past her without knowing what had just happened upstairs. She held her handbag tightly. Everything she had believed was gone. Kelvin did not follow her. He had remained upstairs. The truth kept repeating in her mind. It was all a test. She remembered the small apartment. She remembered insulting Chinedu, calling him a broke man, laughing at him. Her legs felt weak. For the first time, she understood what she had lost. Not just money, not just comfort, but a man who truly loved her. Days passed. Kelvin no longer visited her. His number stopped going through. When she returned to the tall glass building, the security guards did not allow her inside. "Madame, please leave," they said politely. Humiliation burned inside her chest. Her friends stopped calling often. Without expensive dinners and luxury gifts, their excitement faded. Slowly, her world became quiet. Very quiet. One evening, she sat alone in her apartment. The gold necklace she once admired lay on the table. It no longer looked beautiful. It looked heavy. She picked up her phone many times. She wanted to call Chinedu, but what would she say? Sorry? Would sorry rebuild trust? Would sorry erase her words? Tears fell again. For the first time, she did not cry because she lost money. She cried because she understood her mistake.